What's up, world? This is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I want to welcome y'all back, and I want to welcome my pops back to our discussion in civics, and more specifically, our discussion on the Declaration of Independence. Pops, thanks for spending your time and joining me today.
I'm enjoying this conversation because, as you know, this is something that sort of near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and maybe should be to all of us citizens of the United States of America, right?
I agree.
Um, And so last time we started this and we said we want to have this discussion in civics, and we really talked about how important it is to have this discussion. And civics being that educating the citizens of our nation to be, and the reason for that is to be able to effectively participate in our democratic republic, and how really vital it is for our government and our style of government to be successful, for citizens to be engaged, and not only to be engaged but to be educated, to educate themselves, that they have a responsibility to educate themselves so that they can effectively participate in that right. um, we went through a lot and we kind of did this recap of history. And I think we did a really good job at kind of at least recognizing that there were a lot of different layers that were going in to this time of revolution. And we talked about kind of the time in between the Middle Ages and this Enlightenment period, and the emergence of these empires, and really kind of the corporation. Something I think we kind of missed out, and we also talked about how education spread and literacy spread because of the boom of technology. But something that we kind of missed is also, you touched on it, but we didn't say it directly, was this emergence of this Western European middle class, right? That merchant class, and what later we might call the idea of the British middle class, more specifically for our conversation, right? And that really allowed, like you were saying, people to maybe have more time to use this literacy and to explore thoughts, right? Um, what do you think about that as far as that emergence of the Western European middle class, and how important that was to kind of that development we had talked about before?
I think one of the things that come out of the Crusades of the Middle Ages was the emergence of an international banking system, and that banking system was developed to finance the various crusades. And what you had around that was the movement from being an agrarian society to a business society. And they had this business society now that has a little more time on their hand. And like you just mentioned, we had the technology with the printing press and all that sort of come at the same time. So I think that was a part of having that time on their hand to be educated and to start thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And we kind of followed a little bit the secular philosophical thought process, and really getting down to this Enlightenment period. And that's kind of being the overwhelming thought that what we our architects, our crafters of this document, were really steeped in and kind of driven by. Um, and we really did that going through that first paragraph. Today, we're not going to look at very much of the text, but we think that it's kind of a heavy section piece of the text. It's that first sentence of the second paragraph. And I was telling you earlier, there's a book written, and the statement is made that it's the greatest sentence ever written. And and man, it's a pretty powerful sentence. So I'm gonna go ahead and just read that sentence, and then we'll kind of dive in to our conversation. We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's pretty powerful, right? And even now, get a little choked up reading that and thinking about what they're saying in that. Give me what, just reading that again, what is your just initial reaction to that sentence?
We hold these truths to be self-evident, and I have to go back and think about truth. And as the people that may hear this may not know, but I'm a trial lawyer by profession, and so the idea of truth is always very important to me when I'm talking to a jury. And here's my view of the difference between truth and fact. A fact is that physical thing that I can see, hear, smell, taste, touch with my senses. Truth is how I might interpret that. And so truth is different for different folks. A lot of the influences on our lives, our education, as we talked about a whole lot, influences how we interpret fact. Our religion.
So what do we think that our authors in this context, coming from this enlightened thought, these we call them empiricists, what do you think our authors meant by these truths to be self-evident truths?
Well, and they spell that out next. That all men are created equal. That's a truth for them. That was not a necessarily a truth that was shared by the church or politicians or the monarchies around the world. This was a new truth.
Well, and I may disagree with you there, but because I see this, and when I think about self-evident, and you last time you really spelled out what kind of empiricism was and that scientific method, and it seems like these guys are really building off this academic and intellectual political thought in Britain going on that's shifting away from kind of institutional truths, with maybe being the church and the aristocracies, and coming to this idea of self-evident and natural truths, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm saying to you is that their identification of truth has been influenced by their ability to be educated, which they would not have had 100 years before this. Their ability to have a different opinion than the church that would not have happened prior to the Reformation. So yeah, I think I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, and they're kind of saying that these things, there's evidence for these truths in society or in the natural world. They're observable truths, right? When we're doing our scientific method, we have to have observable data, right? And they say with this idea of in nature, with later on in the sentence saying they are endowed by their Creator. What do you know about the concepts John Locke had as far as the natural man and how he built those what becomes to be the English Bill of Rights off of these ideas of the natural man and his Creator?
So what I believe that Locke and some of those guys were alluding to or getting back to, and again they stated here in this statement that these truths to be self-evident, and among these is life. Okay, well you go back and I have my Christian bias, but life is what God created. And so therefore, if God created it, it was good, and so you have a right to it because God created you. I think they kind of go back to that concept Now whether they were, you know, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever but there is an influence of the spiritual in there, that there is a God.
Yeah, and so you talked about it last time in our progression of history that the church, when it kind of became institutionalized, like a lot of things do, maybe went away from its original mission from God and became this political entity, right? And it's kind of maybe really always existing, but for our conversation, starting during the Renaissance period and building up to now, and we say now that at the time of the Declaration of Independence, there's a mistrust in the institution and saying this is the way things are because we said so, and getting more to no, this is the truth because I see the evidence in the real world,
Yeah,
right?
the creation of nature. You know, you and I know you and I both like to hike and get out in the woods, and we believe God created, and so they could see that creation as an absolute natural right.
Yeah, and this is really, like we said before, emerging thought, and it's really really and truly some of the foundational blocks of our modern philosophical talk. And so we don't want to take it there. But in going to this idea of looking to the natural world, it is to say that, you know, men and God and these ideas of rights is not a human construct, right? That these are natural things. God, your creator, whether you call it God or you, whatever you choose to call it, is not a human construct, but it is a natural thing that we are responding to,
Yeah,
right? There
yeah,
is a state of man that is in the natural world.
yeah. And I
And
think that's the life. I think the next one, liberty, expands on that. That yeah, we have life, but again, in my bias and my Christian belief, that in Christ He gives us that liberty to do it and to experience some of the spiritual stuff in Him. So there's that building block.
yeah, and for me, the way I kind of understand what Locke was saying is that in this natural world, individuals are free as far as the laws of nature, God, your creator, and the necessity to sustain yourself and the others around you.
You know, I think that's part of the function of government that they're going to get to, is that is government's job is to allow us to do those things, in whichever direction we go in religious and whatever. But government should allow you to try to experience that life that God is giving, and that liberty to experience the spiritual within your own bounds. That gets to the next one, the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, and we're
So
like we said, we're really digging into that sentence, but that they're building off of that British thought, right?
yes,
In those
yeah,
two clauses, as far as truths to be self-evident and endowed by their creator. And right in between there is the all men are created equal. Now that is where they kind of divulge, right, or diverge from the aristocracy, right, and that thought that noble people were preordained by God to serve as rulers, as guardians of the people, right?
yeah. That's where they tick the rest of the world off.
And well, at least the monarchy, right? But it's really still pushing. This is them pushing, going beyond Locke and that Bill of Rights
Right,
of
right.
1690 or 1689. I'm sorry, whatever that date is exactly. I have in my notes 1689, but for some reason I always think it's 1690, but I'm a year off somewhere. Sorry about that. But like I said, our authors are going beyond that now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um. So in this state, they're saying in this state, this natural state that the British thinkers have developed, um, there is no hereditary of birth, and furthermore, everyone, not just nobles, not just merchants, not just those with influence or power, are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Um, what is this idea about natural rights?
Well, and again, I think that goes back to my understanding of creation, and that God created every how God did that. God created all, and they were all equal. And I fast forward that to the teachings of Jesus when he says, in effect, there is no Greek or Jew, there is no male or female, that we're all equal in God's eyes. So that, and again, that's my bias, but I think that's kind of what they're saying.
Yeah, and so Locke, when he was setting up this natural man, right, he gives this example of the natural man in the wilderness and clearing out some wooded area to create a house and kind of a homestead, right? And in doing that, he creates property, right? This is kind of another, it gets into an economic conversation. We're not going to go there, but in Locke's natural man and natural world, the natural man was mixing his essence with the world to create property. You remember that kind of conversation a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is this idea of essence? And not to go too far, but just very. What's your idea of essence, maybe?
Of essence. Is that
Yes.
what you said? I think essence is the physical.
Okay. Well, so like it is. It's part of your being. It is whatever your being is. And for Locke, it was essence equaled kind of your purpose a little bit. Whatever you did, right? For the natural man, he was mixing his essence in nature. But in our modern society, we mix our essence, our physical work, with whatever to retrieve value from it. We're mixing our purpose with something to create our to sustain us, right? And we don't want to go into the modern idea of that, but just kind of that idea of purpose. And I only did that to feed off your idea and your understandings of God, right? We can go to the I believe the Westminster Catechism. The first question is, what is the purpose of man? What is the essence of mankind? And the
Yeah,
answer
and
is
of course, Westminster, idea or suggestion or answer is to worship and glorify God.
yes, yeah.
The
So that, but
question, the
go
question
ahead.
comes to be, and I actually had this discussion Monday, is what does that mean and how does that manifest itself? And a number of people throughout life, me included, ask yourself the question from time to time: why am I here? What is my purpose in life? And again, my bias, and as I've gotten a little older and matured, I think I understand what the Apostle Paul was saying when he, in effect, said, "I can be okay in whatever state of life I find myself, whether I'm rich, whether I'm poor, because the function of man and how you glorify God is to love your neighbor." our function, wherever you are, whatever your job is, whether you be the president of the United States or the ditch digger, is to love people that are around you.
Yeah, and that's a good idea of glorifying God in that. But to bring it back to Locke, and I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, and that's just a little sidebar, I guess. But Locke kind of reasoned that in this natural state, all are equal in their essence or their natural condition, right? And no one, and because we're all equal in this natural state, no one should impede on another individual's right to life, liberty, and for Locke property. Okay? And once again, we alluded to it, Locke's concept of private property or personal property is much different than our contemporary view. But that's another very intricate conversation for another day. To bring it back to our Declaration of Independence, our authors are really paraphrasing and even extending once again Locke's concepts, right? First of all, it says, and this just comes from your influence and my mother's influence on reading documents, right? These certain unalienable rights, that among these, this ain't necessarily an all-inclusive list, but just, kind of including but not limited to, right? Kind of phrasing there. What do you think?
The reason that's important is among these is I think the authors realize that as time goes on, they're going to have to be adapted. There's going to be an evolution of mankind. And so they left that open. Oliver Wendell Holmes once stated that my right to stretch out my arm stops at your chin.
Yeah, yeah.
As long as my rights don't inflict upon your rights, then I'm good. But then I've got to consider your rights.
Yes, yes, and this, we really harping on this, and I think it's important to honor our country's history and also to preserve hope for the future. Sometimes is to realize that this is new thought. We keep using that word emerging because it is so descriptive of what is occurring. This is not necessarily an institutional belief like other things are. This is being developed. And like you say, other folks go on to develop it further. And we're kind of supposed to continue to develop that, I would say.
Yeah, I think you take a natural progression from what Holmes said. Yeah, I have a right to possess a weapon, and I own a number of weapons, and I enjoy firing. I have a right to possess a weapon, but that right stops when it starts to inflict or impose on somebody else's rights.
Yeah, and I think another way to say that is that you have that right, but that does not relinquish you from the consequences.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, Pops. So we didn't really talk about a lot of the text, but really, is this the linchpin? Is this the cornerstone of this document?
Yeah, I think you could argue that. Yeah, because from that, if you think about the things we've discussed in this last few minutes, we've touched upon at least in the concept of our government that all men are created equal. That means that no one, the president back to the ditch digger, is above the law, in theory.
Yeah, yeah. Man, that's really good stuff. And we're going to continue this, but I'd really like to kind of stop there just so we can maybe meditate on all of the content that is in this sentence. I mean, you've got a lot of heavy stuff that have implications in a broader range of society versus the individual and the society. And next, the next part of our conversation, we're going to keep on following this Enlightenment discussion from the natural man and natural rights, kind of starting with the individual and then going to the reason why governments are instituted and kind of going to the society, right, view. Is that good with you?
Yeah, great.
All right, you got any closing thoughts for this session?
You know, yeah, I guess just the idea and you know what I think your prelude to all this, that this idea of being able to think about this stuff is so important for every citizen of our country.
Yeah, and everybody has the responsibility, not only the right, but the responsibility to educate themselves. And you ain't got to agree with what I say, and you ain't got to agree with what the old guy says. But go educate you, and hey, come talk to us, and we'll talk it out. Maybe you can convince us. This has been Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.